It is my pleasure to welcome Lawrence Jacobs, whose voice in Minnesota politics is well known and well respected. He is the director for the Center for Study of Politics and Governance at the Hubert H. Humphrey Institute and a member of Mount Zion's congregation. It is a joy to welcome you, to welcome our candidates as well.
Thanks, Rabbi. Rabbi, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Spilker, who is my rabbi and has provided extraordinary leadership and guidance in very difficult times in my family. And so I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your leadership, not only in Mount Zion, but in this community. Also, I want to make an announcement. If you're Russian speaking, there's translation services up here, so you should kind of move up in this direction. There's also sign language over in this part. So we're trying to accommodate people. Please take advantage of it if that's of help. About 2 or 3 months ago, this remarkable group of organizers came to me and said, we're going to bring together all the Jewish organizations to sponsor a debate. And I nodded. And then they said, and then we're going to get all the candidates to come. And I nodded. And as I often do, I said, sure, I'd love to help. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what are the odds of that? So I have to say, I'm pitching myself a little bit. All the Jewish organizations did come together, and the organizing committee did a remarkable job. And then all 3 candidates came as well. And I want to thank the candidates. This is obviously an election of enormous consequence. We have elections, and we've been through some of them, where there are choices, but given the budget situation and other sorts of challenges, this is really an extraordinary time. And I want to applaud all 3 of you for taking this election as seriously as you have. I think we've set a record here in terms of the number of debates, the number of conversations. Usually in a cycle, maybe you get 3, 4, perhaps 5. I've lost track, to be honest. I think we're past 14. 19?
The 19th.
This is the 19th debate. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that might be a United States record. We'll have to go and check the books. But I want to thank you because I think for Minnesota voters, they're getting a very clear idea about how each of the candidates stand, and I think all of us benefit from that. And here in Minnesota, we're very fortunate. It's not easy on either the candidates and their families to run. It's not only costly in terms of money, but it's obviously grueling. So thank you for your service. Thank you for the kind of campaigns that you've run. I want us to say a word about the format today. This is, we're going to allow each of the candidates to make an opening statement. There's then going to be a kind of informal conversation, which I will make sure it rotates. There is a timekeeper here, this lovely person waving her hand in the blue sweater, who will keep you to 1.5 minutes once we get rolling. And there's going to be 2 main sections that the organizing committee wanted us to focus on. The first is the changing face of Minnesota, the new citizens that have come to this state, and Minnesota's role in the world. And the second section is on the budget, an issue that you've talked about, but there may be folks here who have not been following it. And in each of those sections, we're going to be taking questions from folks here. So let me start off by introducing the candidates. Senator Mark Dayton got his bachelor's degree at Yale University in New Haven. He served as state auditor here in Minnesota and as U.S. Senator. Representative Tom Emmer received his undergraduate degree at the University of Alaska Fairbank and his law degree here in St. Paul, William Mitchell Law School. He was elected to the Minnesota House of Representatives in 2004. Mr. Horner got his bachelor's degree at St. Thomas University here in St. Paul. 1978, he worked for Dave Durenberger's staff as press secretary and then went on to be not only press secretary but chief of staff. And then in about 20 years ago, he founded Himley Horner, a well-known public affairs firm here in town. Let's start off with each of the candidates making their opening statements. Mr. Dayton, could you begin, please?
Thank you very much for all of you for giving up a beautiful fall afternoon to be here. This is just really overwhelming in your interest and response. And as I was walking through visiting before we started, a woman said to me, be sure you mention community values. And as I was thinking that, those 2 words represent so well the Jewish community and the Jewish faith to your enormous credit. Community in the sense of your historic and continuing concern for the well-being of the people who live with you in this community and in our state. A broader concern that has always impressed me when JCRC and other representatives would come to Washington and visit me in the Senate, our topics were always broad-ranging, and they always included those less fortunate. And it was always really touching and inspiring to see that concern reflected in your commitments and in your causes and in your activities. And second, values. And values is so much a sense of what underlies the greatness of Minnesota. Values, again, about our interrelatedness, as the rabbi said, about our recognition that, as our great Senator Paul David Wellstone said, we all do better when we all do better. And particularly since we'll be talking later about the budget, which is obviously one of the priority issues, it's important to remember that the budget is also about our values, and it's about our priorities. It's about who are we going to serve through the funds that we raise? What are we going to do with them? And recognizing that almost half of our budget is education, about almost a third is health and human services, that these are the ways in which we lift up one another, prepare our young people for an ever more challenging world, and contribute, all of us, to the greatness of this state. It's an honor for me to be with you today. Thank you.
Mr. Horner.
Well, thank you very much. I also greatly appreciate your being here. Let me start by wishing everyone a Happy New Year. Let me also remind you that if you're so inspired to write a check, don't use 5770 on the check, 5771. I hate when that happens. But it is terrific to be with you. And you know, I was struck this morning, and in fact I brought it along with me just as a reminder, reading the column this morning by Minnesota native Tom Friedman, who talks about how he expects in 2012 that we'll have a revolution of the center, what he calls a revolution of the radical center. And that struck me because I was also reading the article in the Star Tribune this morning where actually the chair of the Republican Party described me as being as charismatic as a butter knife. Now I'm head of a revolution. I like that. But you know, here's what I want to leave with you, is that we do need a revolution. But it ought to be a revolution for something. A revolution to change, a revolution to make Minnesota a better state, a revolution of opportunity. Look at the tremendous opportunity we have in Minnesota over the next 4 years. An opportunity to build on great strengths, great assets, tremendous people, to build on the great resources of our education system, of our great businesses, of our great natural assets. It is a revolution. We do need a revolution. But we need a revolution for something, a revolution to bring positive change to Minnesota, to create a state that works for all people, a state of opportunity. That's why I'm running for governor. It's why I look forward to the conversation today, and why I greatly appreciate being with you.
Thank you. Mr. Emmer.
Well, how do you add to those? This is really an honor and a privilege to sit up here with these gentlemen and you, Professor Jacobs. And it shows just how important this election is when you look out across this wonderful building and you look out those windows and you see what a beautiful afternoon it is in October. And all of you have taken time away from your lives to come and participate in our wonderful democracy. People are waking up and they're starting to pay attention. And it's not a matter of Republican, Democrat, middle, independent, whatever you want to call it. It's a matter of what do we all believe and how do we get out of the place we're in? How do we move forward in the state of Minnesota? Jackie and I are happy to be here. My wife is with me today, and we're here because we've got 7 kids. And we're looking at the future of this state and the future of this country, and we're asking, do we want to be the first generation to leave less of an opportunity to our children than previous generations? That's never happened. We want to be part of moving Minnesota forward. The choice in this election is very clear. The choice is doing things the way we've been doing them, which is simply a Band-Aid approach. We raise taxes. They call it revenues. You can talk about all kinds of new taxes from all kinds of different places. But are we going to campaign? Are we going to vote for people that just want to continue to support the unsustainable growth in government? Or are we actually going to vote to have government live within its means and start to deliver the services that people expect in an efficient, affordable, and sustainable manner? And then the number one thing that the next governor of this state has to do in the legislature is start to get our economy moving again. We've got to start to grow jobs in the state of Minnesota. That's the future that we need to have in the state of Minnesota, and hopefully that's the discussion we're going to have today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to all three of you. Mr. Dayton, let me begin with you. The Department of Employment and Economic Development reports that Minnesota exports account for $28 billion in revenues and tens of thousands of jobs. You suggested that you would eliminate the trade office, and so my first question is, does that reflect a diminishing of the importance of trade? And if not, what would you do to maintain and expand Minnesota's trade with the world?
Well, not at all. In fact, it reflects a greater priority, because I'd moved the responsibilities right into the governor's office with a couple of staff to support myself in that endeavor. I've been to China 6 times in this decade, and I know that those relationships are very much established by a governor, a leader of a company, or a leader of the state, or in case of a president, the leader of the nation. I remember the deputy mayor of Shanghai saying to me, first time stranger, second time acquaintance, third time friend. This is the third time that I sat down to meet with him. He's also the man who, when I asked him if he knew where Minnesota was, tapped his heart with a smile and said, Medtronic. Which is exactly why we want this export connection. We want to encourage imports and, responsible trade missions, ones that cement the relationships between countries, between leaders, as well as open doors for businessmen and women in Minnesota to export products. Vitally important.
Thank you very much.
I'm waiting. Sorry.
Are you keeping time? Yeah, we do 20 minutes. Okay, so I gotta watch the clock in this section. Okay, I got it right. Mr. Emmer, we saw Governor Pawlenty go to China recently, and if you look over the past 10 years, one of the most striking changes in Minnesota is the rocketing of China into our most significant trading partner. What would you do to expand trade to China?
Well, first, please call me Tom. It's one of the nicer things I get called, and I'd like that. Well, first off, I think you do have to look at every part of government, every agency. You have to look at every job. You have to evaluate whether or not it's providing value to the people that are supporting it. That being said, sitting up here, I don't agree with the senator that we should be eliminating the trade office. I think, in fact, we should be trying to stimulate trade. Minnesota, for instance, our farmers provide enough food to feed 150 people every year. Each farmer does. We produce more in Minnesota than we can possibly ever consume in Minnesota, so we have to take advantage of our export markets. And how do you do that? One is to have a presence, whether it be China or Russia or in any other part of the world. Yes, China has been a growing partner, if you will, but that shouldn't be the only focus. And it's going to be an issue of the cost of production here in the state of Minnesota. You got to be able to, we produce the best goods, the best food. We produce here in Minnesota, but we've got to be competitive so that we have something to export. And then I do think that is a function of the next administration.
Would you consider that your top priority?
I told you already, the top priority is growing jobs, and that's directly related to jobs, because it's not just creating the job, it's having markets to sell what you produce, so absolutely.
Mr. Horner, when you think about trade, is the primary objective here to drive down the costs of doing business in Minnesota?
Well, the primary objective of trade is not to drive down the cost of doing business. But I do think that for Minnesota to be competitive in the world, we have to understand that we live in a global marketplace in which ideas, capital, and labor are highly mobile. And where we are going to compete, when you look at our exports, it is in food, electronics, high-tech and manufactured goods. So we do need to completely overhaul how it is that we compete in the world. And that's where I think both Senator Dayton, Representative Emmer missed the mark, is that where we're going to be successful is if we make sure that our manufacturers are able to be competitive, if we make sure that we continue to invest in research at our 2- and 4-year schools so that we have the great ideas coming out of there. And we also need to overhaul our tax system. It's not enough to simply say we're going to raise taxes or cut taxes. We need a different kind of tax system. We have a tax system created in the 60s and 70s for an economy and a population that don't exist anymore. If we want to be competitive in trade, we do need to move toward a tax system that rewards investment and moves more toward a consumption-based tax.
Mr. Dayton, before we get into the tax issue, because I can see that just hanging out there, we're going to come back to that. But I want to just stick on this trade issue. When you think of what is going to put Minnesota in the most competitively advantageous position in terms of our trade with other countries, is it lower taxes, is it a different tax system, or is it something else?
Well, it's innovation. If you look at the companies that export successfully, what they're exporting are the goods and products and services that other countries need. And, you know, China has a company called M3, where they take 3M products like Scotch tape and stick-em pads and they imitate them. What they don't have is the ability to, because they don't grow up in a democracy where you can aspire to be whoever you want to be. They don't grow up in a capitalist economy where you're rewarded for taking those kind of economic risks. They don't have entrepreneurs to take ideas and start businesses, keep them small and successful, grow them to medium-sized or large-sized businesses. And then with those products is innovation. Should the government assist that? Absolutely. But most of all, government creates the seeds, helps create the seeds for that with a good education system, so that those companies generate the ideas, then they have the employees to help carry them out. Well-educated, hardworking, productive people have always been Minnesota's great asset. Even though we're exporting goods, we're actually exporting the ideas and the skills and the talents that created those.
Thank you. Tom, one of the questions of real interest to the Jewish community here is the relationship between Minnesota and Israel. In 2008, Governor Pawlenty led a delegation to Israel. Trade with Israel is as high as about $149 million in recent years. Would you commit to leading a trade mission to Israel if you were to become governor?
Absolutely. I think it's a great segue when we talk about China, Russia, other markets. Israel should not just be a partner in trade. We can learn a lot from Israel. I mean, I don't know if you've read, I read a book a couple months ago. I think it's called The Startup Nation. And I'm going to forget. I think it was written by a gentleman named Singer, maybe somebody else. But it talks about the success of Israel and all the venture capital that are being invested right now in Israel as a country and all the things that they are doing to grow their economy. They, in fact, are doing the things that we're talking about. They're trying to streamline the processes so that people who want to invest, people who want to grow new opportunities have the ability to do it in Israel. It's working. We should take a lesson from Israel here in Minnesota, and you're right. It's not all about just lowering taxes, but it certainly isn't about continuing to raise taxes when that's what we've been doing for the past 30-plus years in this state. We've got to look at examples like Israel and say, how are they being so successful? I mean, they've got a great work ethic themselves. We've got great people in this state, but we've created a system that, frankly, is holding down the entrepreneurs. We've got to, I think Israel's a great example. Not only would I commit to lead that, but I would also commit that we're going to try to learn something from Israel.
Thank you very much. Mr. Horner, would you commit to leading a delegation to Israel? And if so, where do you see the strengths in that relationship?
I'm not going to sit in front of this audience and say that I'm not going to Israel. I mean, let's get serious.
No, go ahead, try it.
Everybody jump on board. But look, I want to go back to something that Tom said about learning lessons from Israel, because I do agree. But let's learn the right lessons, and let's make sure that we're really looking at some of the things that Israel has done and has done well, and that we are at risk of turning our backs on in Minnesota. President Clinton cited Israel for having one of the most effective, successful programs in early childhood learning. We ought to emulate that lesson. We ought to learn from Israel the importance of making sure children get off to a good start in their academic careers. And that's not happening in Minnesota. When you have 50% of children coming into kindergarten in Minnesota not fully prepared for success, is it any wonder that our high school graduation rates are falling? Of course not. That takes some money up front. It takes discipline. It takes learning the right lessons. Look what Israel has done to invest in making sure that everybody has opportunity through broader education. Look what it has done in investing in research and development. You know, the reality is these things do take money. We hope some of them take private sector money, but we also have to acknowledge that some of what we need to do in Minnesota needs a government that is going to make investments in the future. If we want to be a state of opportunity, if we want to grow and prosper, not just for a few, not just for those who already are up on their feet, but for all Minnesotans, we better be willing to make some investments, to do it wisely, to do it in a way that is effective, but to do it in a way that builds for the future.
Thank you. Tom, I want to come back to the issue. I want to come to the issue of real concern to folks at Mount Zion and the Jewish community here in Minnesota, which is the changing face of Minnesota. We now have, at least according to 2008, 6% of Minnesota's total population that was foreign-born. Over 340,000 folks living here. And the rate of increase is higher in Minnesota than the country as a whole. We saw an increase in foreign-born population in Minnesota that was over 130% during the 1990s, and it's continued to increase at a fairly sharp 33% in the 21st century. Do you view the population of foreign-born individuals living here as an opportunity, or as something that we need to be careful about to make sure that just those who are documented are here?
Well, you just asked me two different questions, with all due respect. You asked me if I view foreign immigrants, if you will, immigrants to our state as an opportunity. Larry, Professor Jacobs, I view them as a necessity. God forbid that we ever have a day when people do not want to come to the United States of America to try and explore the freedom and opportunity that this country is supposed to offer. We need to have a federal government that actually starts to do its job when it comes to immigration. So when you ask me the second half, which is the undocumented, however you want to call it, we need to have a system that is enforced by the federal government. They need to start to do their job and make sure that they enforce the borders, and more importantly, make for an easy transition so that people that do want to come to this country and explore opportunity and freedom have the ability to do that. I think they're an absolute asset. I think we have to not only welcome people to this country, but we have to give them the opportunity to succeed in this country. Our future depends on it. And I always use the phrase when I go around that this country was built by immigrants. We all, most of us, come from families who came to this country looking for freedom. Its future truly depends on it.
And so when you think about welcoming immigrants to this state, and you talk about its value, do you think Minnesota needs a kind of a law that we've seen in Arizona that is requiring state police to take action if they believe and have reason to believe that the folks they've pulled over are illegally in the United States?
I said when this first was passed that the Arizona law was a great start. And I thought as one individual that this would get the discussion going with the federal government, that they would start to do their job. Unfortunately, it looks like they are doing it again, that we're just hesitating instead of trying to work on immigration laws so that we can have secure borders and we can have a pathway so people can come to this country. Apparently, the federal government is going to continue to drag their feet. The next governor needs to encourage that to happen much quicker. And no, I don't think we've got all the laws we need right now in this state to handle immigration.
Thank you. Mr. Horner, when you think about the role of foreign-born individuals in this state, do you think the state ought to take more aggressive positive steps through our school system, through social services, to welcome and to integrate those new individuals here in Minnesota?
I think one needs only walk down Lake Street, University Avenue, Payne and Arcade, to look at the spirit of entrepreneurialism that new Minnesotans have brought to those corridors, to see the investments that they have made in their neighborhoods, to see the enthusiasm that they bring to this state and to this country to answer the question. We do need to be a state that welcomes new Minnesotans, that embraces new Minnesotans, and that is willing to make the commitment to help new Minnesotans be successful. So I have joined with many other organizations, the business community, advocacy groups, but in opposition to Representative Emmer in opposing English-only laws. I think those are laws that set up barriers to integration that don't welcome, don't embrace. It's not enough just to have good rhetoric. You have to have the actions that back it up. But you also, to Senator Dayton, some of the issues he's proposed, you also have to be responsible. And so I do think that we need to make sure that we have a school system that is embracing new Minnesotans, but a system that works for all Minnesotans, that is advancing the education for all people, putting us all on a track, and holding the schools accountable, holding students accountable, holding parents accountable. Those are the kinds of things we need to make sure that we have a Minnesota that is welcoming to all.
Thank you. Mr. Dayton, there have been some estimates, and I'm going to tell you, I'm not sure how reliable they are, but I've seen various estimates saying that undocumented immigrants in Minnesota have ranged from 55,000 to 85,000. Do you think Minnesota policy, if you were to be governor, ought to be focused on tracking those folks down and getting them out of the state, or do you think our energies ought to lie elsewhere, and if so, where?
Well, I think the chiefs of police of Minneapolis and St. Paul said it very well, that the community policing, they said, is integral to the safety of all of our citizens. And that assigning the police the role of being so-called quote-unquote immigration detectives is, their view, really very harmful to what they believe is their proper role and to the priority they have to protect the safety of the Minnesota public. You know, when I served in the U.S. Senate, to his credit, President Bush, I think being from a border state, understood the realities of the undocumented workers and worked before 9/11 with Senator Daschle, and then after a few years after 9/11, when that polarization seemed to have abated some, worked with Senator John McCain, Senator Ted Kennedy, in a bipartisan way, and you know frankly the sort of the vitriolic ideologues of you know the extreme right wing really just made it impossible to proceed. But there does need to be a federal resolution to this, and it needs to be a responsible one, but that's where it needs to occur. That's under the U.S. Constitution. It is a federal responsibility, and hopefully the environment will be such that that can be undertaken soon, and therefore states taking their own initiatives separately, I think, is counterproductive.
Thank you. Mr. Horner, last week, Governor Quee and faith leaders from Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Hindu, and Muslim communities came together to try to integrate and welcome Muslims into the state and to really stand up against what is seen as harassment, violence, discrimination. How would you better integrate Muslims into Minnesota's community?
Well, I think like so many things, you know, the governor needs to use his role as advocate, as educator, as somebody who can reach out to all Minnesotans. And that's exactly why I do believe this is a time in which we need somebody who isn't beholden to this interest or that interest, someone who can speak to all Minnesotans. You know, too often we see these issues being used as political wedge issues to gain political advantage. I think the governor has to draw a firm line to say, here's the kind of state we want, to be a person who's going to inspire people, to engage people, to hold us all accountable, to be better Minnesotans, to be better people.
Tom, do you think the role of a governor is to welcome all people, and would you reach out to Muslims so that they feel fully integrated here in Minnesota?
Well, first, I would not identify anyone based on race, religion, or otherwise. I think you approach everyone in the same manner. And you know, forgive me, but I hear during this political process terms like rhetoric and drawing lines and investment. But you know what? We've got to get past the politicians' approach to these things. I think the real problem is that we don't talk to each other enough. And it's one thing to say the governor should do this and draw a line and insist on whatever, but how about the governor just goes and tours a couple of these wonderful markets that the Somalis have, for instance, in Minneapolis? I was told when I started running for this office that you don't want to do that. You know, those aren't Republican voters. You've gotten to know me a little bit, Professor Jacobs. I not only ignored what I was told, I went and did that. It's time that if you believe in the freedom and opportunity that this country is supposed to offer, if you believe that people should have the right to be the best they can possibly be, if you believe in the message that you're trying to share with others, it doesn't matter whether they're Muslim, they're Catholic, they're Jewish, they're whatever it is, you go see them. You don't tell them from on high, you go and visit them where they live on the street, and you talk about things that you both agree on. And I think that's the way, ultimately, we not only assimilate into our current culture as Americans, but you get to celebrate the culture you come from and maintain it. And I think that's how you make people feel welcome.
Thank you. Senator Dayton, does the government have a role in that sort of welcoming, or is this kind of more, you know, hortatory of kind of open arms and hugging and touring? Do you see Minnesota government and some of our policies and our state agencies playing a role in integrating a lot of different ethnic groups that have come here, but Muslims in particular?
Absolutely, and with all groups and all individuals. You know, when before I went to the Senate, when then a private citizen, a Somali youth was beaten in Rochester on a newspaper route by a couple of youth, and I went down and met with the mayor there, and the mayor, to his credit, the community of Rochester, to his credit, initiated. I helped get it started, a year-long education program called Not in Our Town. And it was, as I say, ongoing, involved business leadership, civic leadership, and it really, you know, worked on broadening that awareness, that acceptance. When a Somali woman was beaten at the Mall of America when I was a senator, for her attire, I went and met with her and her family and you know, said how sorry I was, as also a representative of this state, for what had occurred. So, you know, when there is injustice, which is when there's violence, when there's intolerance, when there's bigotry, whoever it's perpetrated against, then I think the governor or a senator or any elected official should be using the moral authority of that office to reach out and also to send a broader message throughout our state that not in our state. We're better than that here in Minnesota, and that's not acceptable conduct, and we will not allow it and will not tolerate it here in this state.
Thank you. Mr. Horner, I think all Minnesotans, regardless of political party, support doing everything we can to help our fellow citizens who have gone to serve in Iraq, Afghanistan, other parts of the world in the military, wearing the uniform of the American military. And there's particular concern about National Guard, but there are other parts of the service. What would your administration do to provide more support? Where do you see the problems in terms of returning service personnel to Minnesota?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that are very important. Building on, as you said, all of the good things that Minnesota already has done. One of the things that we need to be very thoughtful about is the burden that service imposes on the spouse and the family left behind. And I think there are some things that we can do as a community to help those families who suddenly may find themselves in the role of a single parent, having to deal with all of the challenges of children, along with probably holding down a full-time job. When I ran my company, one of the things we did, pretty simple but made a huge difference, was we said to our employees that you now can have all of the personal time, all the time off in one bucket. So holidays, sick leave, vacation time, we're just going to lump that all together and call it personal time off, and you can decide how to use it. So if you have a sick parent that you have to take care of, a child that you have to take care of, particularly now if you're the spouse of a service person serving abroad or serving elsewhere, now you have that flexibility to do it. I think we can do some of those kinds of things to make a big difference. But then we also have to be thoughtful about service people returning. Look at one of the huge challenges. I've done a lot of work around the issue of homelessness. One of the most rapid increases in homelessness that we're seeing are returning veterans. And they're coming here oftentimes without getting the kinds of services they need. So I think we do have to put more resources into making sure that we have a good, strong VA system, but that we're also doing outreach to those service people, that we're helping them in this time of transition. We're providing them with job training. And I think that goes to one of the fundamental differences among the three of us, is that a lot of the things we're talking about, it's not just for this group or that group, it's for a stronger Minnesota. We ought to have job training for all Minnesotans in transition. We ought to make sure that all Minnesotans have access to good health care. We ought to make sure that we have a good education system, that we have good jobs. Those are the kinds of things that we need to do to be a healthier state for our service people and for all Minnesotans.
Mr. Emmer, I'm wondering what you think of that comment. What Mr. Horner just said is, rather than just having services for returning members of our community who've served and worn the uniform, that this should be for everybody. We ought to have job training for everybody. We ought to have health care. Do you think that's right, or should there, I mean, what's the government's role? Should we be doing anything for returning service members?
Well, what we would like, I think we would all agree, it'd be wonderful. If we could provide everything to everyone that they ever wanted, everything would be easy. But that's not the way it works. There are limited resources. So the key is, what is government supposed to provide within the resources that it has, and how do you make sure that those are delivered efficiently and appropriately? And then, the thing that keeps getting missed, Professor, that we keep talking about investments all the time. We keep talking about all these promises that we want to make to people that we're going to deliver all of this, is how are you going to pay for it? Because in order to purchase the services that you expect out of government, whether it be retraining benefits, whether it be unemployment benefit, whatever it might be, you have to have a growing private economy. You got to be growing jobs. Because as you grow jobs, that's what drives the revenues. That's what drives more revenue to pay for those services, and that's what's missing. So again, there's a balance. What should government be providing? It's set out in the Constitution. We already have certain social safety nets that we have to look at right now, because frankly, they're eating up the budget faster than we can meet the need. So we have to look at redesigning those services if we're going to continue to deliver them so we can afford them.
That's helpful, but I just want to check. Do you think, if you were governor, would you be proposing and advocating for more services for Minnesotans who've worn the uniform, either in the National Guard, the Reserve, or other military services?
Well, when you narrow it back to that, the answer is yes.
And what would you,
I mean, you expanded it to the entire population. When you can't do enough for the people who actually, not only those who actually put their lives on the line for us, but their families that are left at home to support them.
And what would you do for them?
Well, we've already, I try to enhance some of the things that Governor Pauleni has already started, and the legislature, by the way, over the past few years, enhancing loan opportunities for startup businesses, allowing, for instance, we've already proposed, don't tax their benefits here in Minnesota. We're one of the few states that does. Let's try to attract those people back here. That's one of the most disciplined, well-educated workforces that we could possibly have here in Minnesota. It'll only add to the opportunity to grow our economic investments.
Thank you. Mr. Horner, we've got a question here from the audience, and I'll ask each of you this question. Minnesota has one of the worst achievement disparities between white students and students of color. What would you do specifically to address that issue?
Yeah, well, and I think that that's one of the positives that we ought to say about No Child Left Behind. While I have a lot of concerns about it, I do think we would not be having this conversation around disparities were it not for No Child Left Behind and how it has identified the achievement gap and other gaps that we have in our education system. But I also think that we need to move beyond that. So specifically, some of the things that I would do, some of the things that are in my budget proposal to do very, very specifically, first is that we need to invest more in early childhood education. We need to make sure every student is coming into kindergarten fully prepared for success. Secondly, I think we need to say to our schools, we will remove some of the rigidity. If that means that we need more flexibility on No Child Left Behind, or even that we turn our backs on No Child Left Behind and figure out how we replace those federal dollars, then we need to do it, because we need to allow teachers to teach. We need to make sure that teachers are making that group of 25, 30, 35 kids in front of them the most successful ever. Thirdly, great schools have great principals. We need to identify what it takes to make a great principal, go out and recruit that person, train that person, and put them in charge of the schools.
But Mr. Horner, let me just ask
when you do all of those things, Larry, the research is compelling that that's what engages the families, that's what helps identify where the gaps are and how to close those gaps.
And you and I have talked about education policy, and I know you've put a lot of thought into it, but specifically on the achievement gap, are there specific measures that you think we need to be taking in Minnesota to address it, apart from the general education platform that you've put together?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you're asking me, do we need to keep tracking success among all students? Absolutely. Among students of color as well as all students, we need to make sure that they're progressing. My point, though, is that when we set up arbitrary standards and when we impose on schools such rigidity as we do now in how they're taught, I don't think we are going to close the achievement gap. I think we will close the achievement gap when we have kids coming into school ready to learn, when we say to teachers, we're going to trust you to teach and make these kids in front of you the most successful they can, when we have good principals, and when we get some more flexibility from Education Minnesota.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dayton, what do you think we need to do to direct and tackle and make real progress on the achievement gap here in Minnesota?
Well, specifically, first I would agree with Mr. Horner, the importance of early childhood education starting very early. Fortunately, there are a lot of groups working on this area now and identifying those areas that are most cost-effective, those that are most successful in reducing the achievement gap. Secondly, we need to provide state funding for optional all-day kindergarten. Only about a third of Minnesota students get the chance to partake in that. It's about half of the national average. That's also been demonstrated to be very important for children at risk coming from disadvantaged backgrounds in terms of catching up and being ready to move into first grade and beyond. We subject our 3rd through 11th grade children in Minnesota to some 61 different tests. Most of them near the end of the school year. The results aren't available till after the school year. That doesn't help with the improvement of student performance. The tests that are effective in some school districts in Minnesota and have closed the achievement gap is, for example, a 1-minute reading out loud diagnostic test the first week of school. They can identify those children reading below grade level, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade. The evidence is that for those children that stay with that program of an individual attention or small group assistance, by the end of the school year, about 85% of them are reading at or above grade level. That's life transforming. That closes the achievement gap because they have the opportunity then to participate fully in society. And we need to recognize that the part of the gap is kids who are coming here from other countries or other parts of this country, who come in at various stages. You go to the Wellstone International School, you see people graduating 19, 20, 21, 22 years old who have come here as teenagers are getting education for the first time in their lives, learning to speak English for the first time in their lives. So this has to be ongoing. We have to recognize that young people are coming at all different stages in their academic careers, and we need to make sure we have that inclusiveness and that remedial special assistance available every year, and ideally in every school, in every community certainly, to help them catch up and succeed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Emmer, you've described the achievement gap as unacceptable. Would you take specific steps to address it, and if so, what would they be?
Absolutely, and this is a place where I take issue with my colleagues. They talk about all-day, everyday kindergarten. They talk about investments, but they haven't produced a complete and balanced budget. I mean, Senator Dayton's is $1 billion short. When you start adding these promises for more education spending, it goes well beyond that. And Mr. Horner's is $2.5 billion with a big hole in it. You can protect everything you want, but what are you ultimately going to cut? We have provided a balanced budget, the only complete balanced budget that requires government to live within its means. And frankly, it holds K-12 education harmless at the current investment of $13.3 billion and adds another $500 million. How would we attack this? You know, the issue is early childhood education, and it's those ages 3 and 4, and making sure that parents understand that they do have a choice. They can put their kids into a situation where they're going to be prepared with approved curricula, guidelines, not just babysitting services, but guidelines that are focused towards literacy, because that's the issue. And kids need to understand that they can have success before they get there. You know, we talk about this all the time, that the debate at the legislature usually is, well, parents are not engaged. Parents don't get engaged enough in their kids' education. Think about it. If you come from the working poor neighborhood and your child goes into a classroom where he or she has a feeling, whether it's conscious or unconscious feeling, of that they're not going to be successful, you get exactly what you put them into. And parents will tend to disengage when you have them in that situation. The one thing that I think Jackie and I truly believe is that every parent wants the same thing for his or her child, whether they have all the resources that the world can offer or they don't have many of the resources the world can offer. We all want our children to have the opportunity for a better life. If you can create the situation, we've already got dollars there. We've got to focus these dollars. We've got to make sure that the curricula is addressing literacy so they're prepared when they get to school to succeed. That's how you will attack the achievement gap. Right now, we got great people over the years who have tried different ways of addressing this with lots of dollars. We have to recognize it's not a Republican-Democrat thing. It's just not working. We have not managed to close this gap, and it's time to look at doing it a different way. And I think it's focusing those early education dollars, getting curricula designed to literacy, and making sure that these kids are prepared to be successful when they get to the K-12 system.
Thank you. And that was a beautiful transition to another set of questions that we want to get into, which is about the budget. Senator Dayton, you've proposed that we return to the tax rate that existed in 1994. Why?
Well, going back to that time, Larry, the responsibility for the state and local taxes were pretty evenly distributed across all of our taxpayers. Everybody paid about the same percent of their income. And now, according to the Minnesota Department of Revenue, the top income earners in this state, the top 1%, people whose average income is over $1 million, pay only 2/3 the percent of their income in state and local taxes as everyone else. So I believe that we need to reduce the regressivity in our tax system by raising the income tax rate on top income earners, and that's the basic difference between myself and my two colleagues up here, who would increase taxes on middle income taxpayers by Mr. Horner adding the sales tax to clothing and to consumer services like haircuts and car repairs. And Representative Emmer, since we've acknowledged that the Department of Revenue is our authority on this matter, they've said that for every dollar you cut in funding for local government aids or county aids or school funding, for every dollar you cut, property taxes go up by 67 cents, which is why, as we learned with Governor Plenty, no new taxes, that approach is really just not going to take effect. In fact, the property tax in Minnesota under Governor Plenty have gone from $4 billion to $7 billion. That's the most regressive tax. Middle-income people pay about 5 times the percent of their income in property taxes as the very top, and they pay about 2.5 times the percent of their income in sales taxes as the very top. I want to protect middle-income taxpayers, and these two gentlemen wanted to raise taxes primarily on the middle class.
Mr. Horner, you've talked about raising sales taxes. Do you agree in principle with Senator Dayton that tax policy ought to be fair, such that those who have more income ought to pay a higher rate than those who have less income? Just on the level of principle, do you think that's the right kind of approach to tax policy?
I think the right approach to tax policy is to have a tax system that addresses the economy and the population as it actually exists today. I don't think it is fair to have a tax system that just completely disregards Minnesota's place in the country and Minnesota's place in the world. I mean, in a marketplace where, as I said, you have ideas, capital, and labor that are so highly mobile. One of the reasons we have had the huge roller coaster of budget deficits and surpluses over the last couple of years, last several years, is that we have an over-reliance on the income tax. And the more reliance we put on the income tax, Senator Dayton, the more we will go through these boom and bust cycles. And that is the most unfair approach that we could possibly take for Minnesota. It is why we end up making crisis cuts. It is why we have a legislature that Representative Emmer was a part of that does things like this past session, take a $3 billion deficit, kick the can down the road, and leave us with a $6 billion shortfall. So it's not about just tweaking the system or raising income taxes to one of the highest rates in the country. It's not about pretending that we have all of this revenue coming in and we don't have to make any hard decisions. We are not going to reach prosperity if we continue to tax success or if we continue to punish the poor. So my approach is we need an overhaul of the tax system. We need to completely redo, and we need to start making that step now. And it starts with creating more incentives for investments by individuals and businesses in new companies, in research and development, technology, new equipment, those kinds of things that don't just pad a company's bottom line, but go to growth, go to expansion, go to job creation. But then we do need to be honest and say that we're going to have to pay for it. And so we ought to do that in a way that matches the economy that we compete in, and that is a consumption tax. So lower the rate by 1%. If you're out buying furniture, appliances, you'll pay less on those purchases. Then we can broaden the base to include clothing. And we can put in protections for low and middle income. Maybe we start the tax on items $100 and above, or we exempt children's clothing. We can do those kinds of things that are smart, but we need to move away from this highly volatile income tax. We need to build in equity. We can do that. We can make a consumption tax more fair. But we need to be a state that is competitive. We need to be a state that recognizes that if we don't make some of these changes, we're just going to slide down the path to mediocrity.
Mr. Emmer, you're over here licking your chops, hearing these two folks talking about raising taxes. You've already kind of indicated...
Did you say licking chops?
It's a New York expression.
It's just being patient.
Yeah, no, you are, and I appreciate that. What I want to ask you is this. You've talked a little bit about government living within its means, that the route is not to raise taxes, that we've got to live within the means that we have in the state. What do you say to Minnesotans, including some Republicans, who think that relying on cutting projected spending and to the degree that you've proposed in your specific proposals is too much? It's cutting into the bone.
Well, first, we got to be honest with Minnesota. I mean, I continually hear that we've got a $5.8 billion deficit. Ladies and gentlemen, we only have a $5.8 billion deficit if we are truly committed to spending more than we have. People need to understand, I think, across Minnesota, and when you tell them this, which I've been doing over the last several weeks, they sit back and go, you got to be kidding. I was told we've been cutting everything. No, you're not cutting everything. Everything's going up. You're just not going up as fast as the government bureaucracies want you to. Based on current tax collection projections in the state of Minnesota, the next governor and the next legislature will actually have approximately 7 to 8% more to spend. That's almost another $3 billion to spend. And that's why we proposed a budget that works within the roughly $33 billion the next government, the next governor, the next legislature will have to spend. Not that I'm proposing this, but for instance, in theory, if we just froze spending today and didn't change a thing, we just all agreed we were going to hold tight for the next 2 years where we're at in every program, theoretically we would have a surplus when we got done with the next 2 years. We are going to have more to spend, and here's what Minnesota has to understand, I believe, and this is what we're trying to share. People don't realize, as we hear statements about your property taxes will go up if LGA is cut, local government aid. How many people in Minnesota realize that only 5 cities in this state get a little over 40% of all the LGA dollars? It's not directly correlating to property taxes and LGA. We got to start being honest with people, and here's the real telling thing. Since 2001, ending in this biennium, 2011, state general fund spending will have grown by almost $6.5 billion. That's right. It didn't get cut in the last 10 years. It's grown by almost a fifth of the spending out of our general fund. These two gentlemen suggest, without providing complete budget plans, that it should grow by almost $8 billion in just the next 2 years. This can't continue. We've got to start to figure out how to deliver services people expect from government within the resources that government has. We simply cannot continue this tax and spend mentality. Yes, there is a place for government, but it's time for people within government to start figuring out we just can't continue to grow this thing at the pace we're growing it, one, without growing your private economy, and two, with the enormous growth. Health and Human Services. Professor, I've talked about this. It's scheduled itself, Health and Human Services, for a 32% growth in the next 2 years. If we just sit back and think, If we allow that to go unchecked without being creative and trying to find new ways to deliver government services that are affordable and sustainable over the long term, by 2020, that area of the budget alone will eat up all of the budget. There will be no money for K-12, for roads and bridges, for public safety. We have to simply start looking at doing it differently from just raising taxes and trying to fund the unsustainable growth of government.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dayton, what's wrong with the idea of just freezing spending?
Well, because we're going to have 20,000 more students in our K-12 education system 2 years from now than we have today. We have 200,000 more people living in Minnesota than the time period that Representative Emmer is referencing. And so we have more people paying taxes. Actually, we'd have even more, except there are fewer people working today. But there are 200,000 more people living here. We've got a population growth that's going to continue. You have to look at what we're spending per individual, and then those numbers look much flatter than that. Governor Plenty's cut the state workforce by 11% during his 2 terms. But the question is, it goes back again to what I said earlier. It's about our values and our priorities. You know, class sizes are growing in Minnesota. We have 10 school districts now on 4-day school weeks because of lack of money, not for educational reasons. Tuition at the University of Minnesota is 50% higher than the tuition of the state universities in the surrounding 4 states, 1/3 higher than the next highest, the University of Wisconsin. Our tuition at our minuscule colleges and universities are among the highest. I hear from so many working Minnesotans who not afford to send their own children to our own state colleges and universities. We talked earlier about the achievement gap. How are we going to do that with 35 children in a 5th grade classroom in Rochester, Minnesota, with 1 teacher in a school that has 17 different languages? You know, so if we really are serious about our values and our priorities, then that's what we need to look at. We say, what do we need to do to assimilate all these people from all over the world? What do we need to do to give them the best possible education so they can be successful? Representative Emmer talks about the healthcare costs, and he's correct in the sense that those costs are going higher, and also one of the primary reasons is, we just learned about 2 weeks ago, 50,000 people have gone this year from private health care, private health insurance in Minnesota to the public health programs, either because their employers no longer provide private insurance, they can't afford it, or they've lost their jobs. So these are real human beings. These are challenging problems. Absolutely, this deficit is very, very serious. And these are real human beings that depend upon education or health care, and that's, again, the faith of the community that we all should believe in.
Thank you very much. Mr. Horner, you've talked, and you've already talked today about the value in expanding the sales tax. You haven't been terribly clear, though, about what it would apply to, what it wouldn't apply to. Could you give us a little more detail as to how extensive the sales tax, what kind, you talked about clothing, I mean, how many different kinds of services are going to be kind of hit by this new sales tax that you have in mind? And isn't that, as Senator Dayton has suggested, a regressive tax that's going to really hit those who have less?
No. I mean, the economists who have taken a look at it have said that if it's designed correctly, that we can do it in a way that is fair for everyone. So it is going to involve personal services, not business-to-business services, in which we have a competitive stake in the ground. And it will include getting more revenue out of clothing. And again, we can put in protections. But look, here's the issue. I mean, I agree with Representative Emmer that we'll have 7 or 8% new revenue. And that's great. Here's the problem. We didn't spend $30 billion in this biennium. The legislature you were a part of spent $34 billion, but you only had $30 billion to pay for it. You used $2 billion in federal one-time stimulus money, and you borrowed money from schools, from communities, from businesses to get your $34 billion. Now, even for a liberal arts major, Representative Emmer, if we're spending $34 billion today and your budget is $33 billion, that's a $1 billion cut in anybody's book. And to your budget, Senator Dayton, we can't just, I mean, I agree with you that we have new people coming into schools, more older Minnesotans who are going to need care. We do have those growing needs. But we can't just keep funding more and more growing needs without getting in and changing the structural basis of what's driving these costs. We've got to do real reform. And that's what my tax reform is. Every economist, Art Rolnick, the newspapers, everyone who has looked at the 3 budget proposals that I'm aware of have said, this is the way that we ought to go. Why? because it says to everybody, we all have to share in the problem. They left us a $6 billion hole. We all better grab a shovel because we all have to help dig out if we all want to have the opportunity. And there's the problem. You can't just keep saying, we'll take the status quo and make it bigger, and you can't just keep saying, oh no, we'll take the status quo and we'll make it a lot smaller. We need to change the status quo because for so many Minnesotans, the status quo isn't working. And that through reform, those changes are going to take leadership. And I'm the only one up here who actually has led something, who has created a business, who has brought people together, who has said to Minnesotans, we'll find the common ground. Not the Democratic ground, not the Republican ground, but the Minnesota common ground. And in the next 4 years, that's our challenge, but it's also our opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Emmer, I got a question here that asks if you've personally known someone who's living in poverty or has lived in poverty, and how you've seen them escape that poverty or maybe get stuck in poverty. Could you give us a little sense of your personal experience with people who may have been, down and out?
The answer is yes. I mean, we see everybody around us every day, and it's getting worse. And frankly, Senator Dayton, you just made my argument for me earlier. When you talked about, we found out 50,000 people have moved from private insurance onto public health programs. You just talked about how we have all kinds of people, more and more people are unemployed. This is the issue. How do we move people off? First, it's not about government just giving them something. Because the more government just gives somebody something, it destroys their opportunity to try and realize their own abilities. It doesn't incent them to try and pull themselves up. That's what your family, your friends, your faith community, government can have a part in it, no doubt. But if that's the only opportunity that someone's offered, what is the opportunity? You have to give them the ability, and the ability is the opportunity for a better life. A better life comes with having opportunities for employment. And, Mr. Horner, you talk about reform and not doing the status quo, but all you're doing is expanding government. You're not doing any reform. You're talking about expanding more revenue streams for an already bloated, oversized bureaucracy. You're not reforming it at all. You're doing nothing more than throwing another tax life preserver to government as it drowns without addressing what we have to address today. We simply cannot continue down this road, because if government is allowed to grow, as both of you seem to believe it should, and by the way, Mr. Horner, I would also suggest that we, again, have provided the only balanced budget, the only honest balanced budget within the roughly $33 billion the next governor and legislature will have, and to suggest that somehow that it's already been spent and perhaps the next governor and next legislature don't have to show up is not the way it works in Minnesota. We will have an obligation to do our job. But Larry, I'll just finish quick, and I apologize, because I see you now chomping at the bit. You simply can't say government's going to grow by 17% every 2 years. We've got to answer the call right now, and you want to help people out of the situation they're in. You got to create a growing and vibrant private economy so people have an opportunity for a real good quality job to improve their station.
I don't want to dwell on this because we've got other questions here, but for some of those people who are the 50,000 who, had jobs, who are hardworking, who play by the rules, who've lost their insurance, how do you respond to that? And to talk about, creating opportunity when, they're kind of sliding down the economic escalator. Yeah. What do we do?
I just told you. I mean, I tell you, in my county, I represent the eastern half of Wright County. We've got a lot of contractors in our county. When the Twin Stadium was done, what are they doing? Today, if you come to my county, not only do you find empty homes on every street, but we've got a lot of people in Wright County that put their kids to bed tonight. They'll put their kids to bed and they'll get in their pickup truck and they'll drive to North Dakota, South Dakota. They'll drive to Oklahoma and Nebraska because that's where the work is. How do you do this? We've put out the only plan to do it. You got to reduce taxes. You got to streamline regulation. You got to make Minnesota a place once again where people are not only willing to invest, they see the opportunity to invest, and you got to allow our existing employers not just to survive anymore, but to once again thrive. I mean, I look at 3M as an example. Larry, 3M is going to invest up to $2 billion in expansion in the next 2 years. Ladies and gentlemen, how much of it is here in Minnesota? Minnesota doesn't have to be the cheapest place to do business in the country or the world. We just have to be competitive because we have such a great workforce. But we got to recognize that what we're doing is not creating a competitive environment to draw investment back to Minnesota and give people these opportunities to work here.
I just got the word that we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you to keep your answers shorter. I've got 2 questions, and the last question I think all 3 of you will enjoy. So let me try to get to that last question. Senator Dayton, what will you do to stop the thousands of foreclosures in Minnesota?
Well, we got to get our economy growing again. We need to get people back to work. We need to definitely, look at the mediation program. Whether we should put a moratorium or not is something the legislature should discuss. But we got to look at what we need to do. I think we need to, provide the wherewithal, wherever possible, for people to work out these resolutions with their lenders and to negotiate terms where they can keep their home, because anybody who abandons a home, is one less contributing member of that community. And you go into certain areas of the state. Representative Emmer spoke of his area. I've been up in places like North Minneapolis. You've got whole blocks of devastation and abandonment, and that makes it extremely difficult for those who remain. It makes it extremely difficult again for the broader community.
Do you think
I'd be proactive and say, and I get the lenders to be proactive and say we've got to really extend the terms here. We've got to renegotiate here and give people a chance, and then also give them the wherewithal through employment and economic growth to get themselves back on their feet and to get square.
Thank you very much, Senator. Mr. Horner, what do you think we need to do to stop these foreclosures that are sweeping Minnesota?
Yeah, well, and a good deal of my community service work has been in the area of housing, both in affordable housing, homelessness, as well as the problem of foreclosures. And there are several things that we ought to do. First of all, we need to make sure that both there is good counseling available to people in crisis, but we also need aggressive outreach to help people identify early enough in the cycle when they are in crisis. Reach out to them, make sure they know that there are services available, counsel them through those opportunities, and provide them with some professional level services to help. And there are a lot of great organizations in the nonprofit community that are doing this. We need to make sure that those are available. I think we need to work closely. The governor needs to work closely with agencies like the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency to see what we can do there to help with some of the transitional programs to help people in crisis. And thirdly, as everybody has said, and as we all agree, we do need to reinvigorate the economy. We need to make sure that we do have a growing economy that is going to create new jobs. I don't think we're going to create a lot of new jobs just by cutting government to the bone. I think when you look at where the really great jobs are going to come from, they're going to come out of the Biomedical Diversity Center at the University of Minnesota that Representative Emmer vetoed. They're going to come out of those small businesses. The 8%, and I agree, Senator Dayton, it is only 8% of the small businesses in Minnesota that will pay your high income tax. They happen to provide 90% of the jobs in small businesses, so I think we ought to be worried about that. You can't just tax the job creators without killing jobs, but you also can't ignore that we need investment in the future in order to create the really good jobs. So it's all of those things.
Representative Emmer, apart from the job creation, I got you on that point. Is there a role for government, and particularly if you were sitting in the governor's office, what would you do to put a stop to these foreclosures, or at least slow them down?
One, get control of government spending, which I've told you. Create a budget that government can provide the things that it's supposed to provide. And we're not talking about cutting it to the bone. I just got to point out, Larry, the Health and Human Services budget that we produced is actually $650 million greater for the next biennium. It's not less. I've already told you the K-12 budget is actually greater. Yes, there are areas that are lower, but it's responsible and it's within our means. One, get control of runaway, uncontrolled, unsustainable government spending. Two, immediately, don't don't make political promises for 2014 and beyond immediately. Reduce the corporate franchise tax by a point in each of the next 2 years. Put another $360 million plus in the hands of business to start making capital investments again and hiring again. 2, create a 10% exclusion of income for small businesses, those S corporations, LLCs that are filing personal tax returns so that they can start hiring people again. 3, you asked me, I'm going to answer it. I'll stop.
Oh.
I mean, I was on a roll.
You were on a roll, and what I'm just curious...
I found out I veto stuff now, so I wanted to quick get all this out there.
But what I wanted to... I think what we want to know is specifically with regard to foreclosures. We all get that you want to generate economic growth and jobs and get the economy rolling. Are there specific things that you think the governor ought to be doing, perhaps the legislature, perhaps with, as the other two have mentioned, with community organizations on foreclosure?
But Larry, that is the answer. I mean, if you're trying to move into an area, I mean, certainly just ask it. If you want to ask me if the legislature should start stepping into the relationship between parties that are in a contract, no, I don't believe so. I think contracts, you have to be able to rely on contracts that you make with other parties. But you know what? You want to solve the problem, create stability, predictability in Minnesota, get our economy moving again so people can once again have jobs and start to generate income in order to pay the mortgage, put food on the table. And by the way, I also don't think that when you talk about raising taxes, as these gentlemen have talked about, you don't eliminate the mortgage interest tax deduction. You don't do those things. It's time that government live within its means. We got families and businesses doing it all across this state. It's time government do the same thing, and let's get those families working again so we can eliminate this problem and get confidence in our economy and our future again.
Thank you. We're almost at the end of the question phase. Last question from the audience. Senator Dayton, would you support making Bob Dylan the official Minnesota poet? It's right here.
I'd say that'd be positively 4th Street.
Mr. Horner?
Again, how do I say no to a question like that, of course?
Bob Dylan the what?
The official Minnesota poet.
Actually, he can come with us on the trip to Israel.
But do you think, would you make him the official Minnesota poet?
Well, he's very talented. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well,
we're blessed with a lot of wonderful poets. Garrison Keillor, Robert Bly, we're blessed with a lot of wonderful poets. But
my wife's a fiction writer.
There's room for many.
My wife's a fiction writer. I'm not sure she would appreciate this.
Did she ask the question?
No, she did not. I got to tell you. I'm just curious, have you had this question in any other debate?
Yes, every debate.
Okay.
Bob Dylan's been the #1 topic of every debate we've had.
It's posted on my website.
Thank you.
With details.
I'm sure Deed has done a report on it. Well, okay, we've reached close to the end. We've got a couple more things to do. Wanted to give each of you an opportunity to make your closing statements. Representative Emmer.
Well, again, I want to thank every one of you for taking time from a beautiful fall day to participate in what I consider still to be the greatest democracy on the planet. This is what it's all about. Learn what the candidates are about and make an informed decision. I'm sure you're going to hear somebody say it's not all about raising all of this and cutting all of this. That's not what this election is about. You have 3 people running for the office of governor of the state of Minnesota, and it is truly an honor and a privilege, and I'm sure these fine men will say the same thing. And it's been an honor and a privilege to be here with both of you, and even though we've done this now about 100 times, I think we're related now. We've been here so much. But here, you have 3 people running, you only have 2 messages. On the one side, you've got the message that really is business as usual in the state of Minnesota. You know, government has run out of money. It wants more money. It's got an insatiable need to grow even more, this time by 17%. So these gentlemen, good people that they are, they suggest 2 different ways to get there. One is tax the rich, which actually hits every small business in Minnesota, every small mom and pop business. When you're filing joint returns at $150,000, you're going to kill small business in this state. It's the wrong idea at the wrong time. I respectfully submit. The other talks about all these services, but you can't balance the budget based on what he's talking about. More importantly, where are we going to be in 2 years or 4 years? We're going to be right back where we are today. It is time for leadership that recognizes we simply cannot continue this way. Government must live within its means, and we got to get jobs growing again in the state of Minnesota. We look forward to the election on November 2nd, and hopefully we can earn your support.
Thank you. Mr. Horner?
Well, I think one of the most important jobs of a governor is to be a good listener. And so I have to say to my friend, Representative Emmer, that if we've been here 100 times and you've only heard 2 things, because what I've been talking about really is about the future. You know, there was a very nice article in the Star Tribune this morning about me, and the profiles of my colleagues will be coming in the next couple of weeks. But one of the things that I cited there was a great quote from President Theodore Roosevelt, who said something to the effect that you can't just talk, you have to act big. Lisa in the audience said, I really hope my question gets asked, because her question was about how do we inspire people? How do we inspire Minnesotans to be even better than we are, and particularly that younger generation? And I think we inspire Minnesotans by saying we are a state of opportunity, but we're a state of opportunity if we're willing to act big, if we're willing to do the bold things that Minnesota is going to take. And it is about overhauling our tax system. It is about investing in research and the future. It is getting past the divisive issues, the divisive politics that only serve to drive a wedge. It's about you. It's about a governor who's willing to say to all Minnesotans, we're in this together. We're all going to have to share the responsibility of solutions, because that's the only way we share the opportunities that come from that. So thank you very much, and I very much would appreciate your support.
Senator Dayton.
This is about the future, and it's also, as was once said, if not now, when? And now is the time to lead Minnesota in a better direction. We've headed in this state over this last decade through disinvestment in education, through disinvestment in our infrastructure, through turning our backs on people in need, to a state that doesn't have the greatness of its people. And that is a failure of leadership. It's a different kind of leadership that I want to provide. It's one that calls upon the best in Minnesota, to give the best of what we have to improve the quality of life for all of our citizens. It is about investing in education, because we know that education has been the key to our past success, social and economic. It's the key to our future success. It's absolutely our moral responsibility, as well as our opportunity, to give every child coming here from every part of the country, the world, and those born here a chance to succeed in this ever more competitive global economy. It's about investing in our colleges and universities, both to give them those opportunities and also because we know that's the source of the entrepreneurs with the ideas. They're going to start the businesses, they're going to grow, they're going to create the new economic environment that we want. It's about streamlining government processes, yes, reforming government, as I've done when I've headed 3 different state agencies, inspiring people to give more of themselves, to do it better, more efficiently, something that's frankly been lacking in Minnesota in this last administration. There are all sorts of opportunities. If we bring people together, if we identify where we want to go, we will, as the theme of my campaign says, create together a better Minnesota.
So the 2 things I want to close with. One is I want to thank 3 of you. I've been to some of the other debates, and I want to thank you for your good humor and your civility. This is a holy place, and we respect you coming into our holy place and sharing it with us, so thank you very much.